Good evening. We're having too much fun up here, so we wanted you guys to join us too. So thanks for coming out to our cooking class tonight. I think I see a lot of familiar faces, maybe a couple of new ones out there. My name is Rhonda. I'm one of the dietitians here at the hospital. And there are four of us usually do the cooking class these days. So Jackie, you're familiar with, she's another dietitian, and Lindsay has joined us more recently as a dietitian, and Jared's been here forever.
And a day.
And a day. And he's our cook from down in Nutritional Services that helps us with food preparation. So we, again, appreciate you coming out. I know it's nice and cool in here, right? That's why you're here, because the temperature is good, right? So tonight we're going to be doing fast foods, and it is not McDonald's. That's what someone earlier accused me of, saying we're just going to talk about McDonald's. We're not. Our definition of fast foods for tonight's session would be things that you do quickly, that do not take very long in preparing. How many of you like to spend hours and hours in the kitchen? Yay, Jan does. If you want somebody to come and spend lengthy times in the kitchen, call Jan. Sometimes I like spending a little bit more time in the kitchen than others, but a lot of times not. After working all day and getting home, it would be really nice to have something that is done quickly. So hopefully we can give you some ideas that are things that are not drive-through, but fast preparation in your kitchen at home. So I think we're going to start off with Jackie's going to do the first one. And you should have your recipes there, and then we have a second page of some ideas we'll talk about later on at the end. So Jackie, tell us about margarita quesadilla.
Yeah, I hope Jared has come around and taken your margarita orders. That's what we were laughing about up here. He said, where are the margaritas? Our criteria for these fast food recipes were to be 15 minutes or less. Because how many times have you gone home and you're like, I am so hungry, I need food now, or maybe it's just you're too tired, or it's too hot outside and you don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. How many of you have been there? I've been there. Been there a lot, maybe 5 days out of the week. I don't know. So these recipes are hopefully to help you nourish your body with really nutrient-rich foods and to do so quickly. So the margarita quesadilla is one of my favorites. It's something that is a go-to when I really don't have a lot of food at home either. So it's very, doesn't call for a lot of ingredients, and that's what I really like about it. So using a whole wheat tortilla, when we're selecting that, we're wanting to get at least 3 grams of fiber in our serving. Looking at the ingredient list and seeing that it doesn't have any hydrogenated oils in it. So how many of you are familiar with reading that food label on the back? So when we're looking at that, you'll find those hydrogenated oils under ingredients, and that's just something we want to monitor and watch for and really cut out of our diet as we're able to. So it can commonly be found in some of our grains and bread products. So we've chosen the whole wheat tortilla just because of that added fiber. There's a lot of nutritional benefit there, with feelings of fullness, helping with bowel regulation, etc. So we're choosing the whole wheat tortilla, and then we're doing 1/4 cup of cheese. You can do less cheese. If you do more cheese, you might be adding more saturated fat, more sodium too. So just to kind of be aware of that food. It's a great source of calcium as well as protein. So like the cheese. And then spinach, I always have green lettuce or leafy green products in my fridge, and so it's a great way to just add some color and then just some more nutrients, some more fiber into your food product. So if you're someone who doesn't buy lettuce often because you feel like it just ends up going bad in your fridge, you can also choose to buy like a frozen spinach. And then if you were to make this meal, to just saute it and then to towel off some of that extra liquid, the water that comes off of that, you can add that into that recipe too. So whether it's frozen or maybe it's raw, adding that spinach is just a great touch to this recipe. And then how many of you have a garden right now with tomatoes? I'm getting a lot of tomatoes. And so this is a great recipe to maybe utilize some of those tomatoes. Garden fresh tomatoes taste like nothing else, right? So you're adding your tomato slices onto the half of the tortilla. And with the garlic powder, I don't know if 1/4 of a teaspoon is a little generous, but to me that's a good amount. I probably would add even more. So you're just seasoning it with that garlic powder. It doesn't contain any salt in it. You could also do some oregano if you were trying to add just a little bit of an alternative taste there. Then you just heat it up in medium heat. I don't know if Jared has any quesadilla tips on how to get it that perfect golden brown without burning it, and then also getting the cheese melty.
It can be difficult. Does anybody have a quesadilla maker?
No.
You do. Those are so much fun. They're handy. Actually, whenever I inherited one whenever my wife and I got married, and I love it because it's just like a waffle maker. You put your bottom tortilla down, all your goodies in there, your next tortilla on top, clamp it down, it shuts and it locks it in place, and it even cuts it into neat little squares. So they're handy to have, especially if you live a very busy lifestyle and something like this is something that you would go to for a really quick, easy lunch one Saturday afternoon in between running errands and working in the garden, different things like that. What I've found is if you use a mixture of oil and butter to butter the tortilla, it's not going to darken as quickly. Plus, if you've got like a flat top grill or something that you're using to make them, if you'll take a piece of aluminum foil and set your quesadilla on top of your aluminum foil and then set that on top of the grill, it keeps it from scorching the butter, right? It heats the butter, it kind of bakes the oil and the butter into the crust there. Now granted, you are going to be taking on, all of these that I did, I sprayed them with pan spray only. Sprayed them with pan spray, set them on our flat top grill. It looked really silly out there with 15 quesadillas on our big flat top, all aluminum foiled up. So, but it really does. It just makes it to where the crust gets nice and crisp, the cheese melts, and it doesn't burn everything. Now, I'm the type that I like my quesadilla to be crispy. I don't want it, you should be able to hold a quesadilla with just a couple fingers or a hand and it shouldn't fall over, right? Unless you load yours full of like 3 pounds of toppings, then there's nothing you can do. It's gonna fall apart, right? But if you have a modest amount, a normal amount of ingredients on there, it should stand up on its own. And to get that, you really just depends on the piece of equipment that you're using. Learn the temperature settings on it. Learn what scorches really fast, what cooks really fast. You know, and if you're doing something like toast on it or something, because I know some people use their griddle to make their toast on instead of putting it in a toaster. It works just the same. But, you know, doing it that way, you have to learn how your machine operates. And that's the best way to do a quesadilla is know the equipment that you have, understand where the temperature settings are at where it'll brown it, and the cheese will melt all at the same time. And it just takes practice learning that because, like I said, every machine is different. If I would sit here and tell you that there's one perfect temperature, you'd all go home, you'd all set your ovens to a certain temperature that Jared told you, and you'd all come back and tell me I was a liar, right? I don't want to do that. So, yeah, 1 or 2 may say that was perfect, but I'd say we'd probably all have different results because we all have different ovens and equipment. So learn the equipment, know where that sweet spot is, almost like if you're doing an omelet. Does everybody have like their perfect omelet pan? Right? A lot of you do, I know. I do too. There's like one pan in my house that makes an awesome omelet, but you have to have it at the right temperature. So
Temperature is key. And so with this quesadilla, the serving size is just that one, so it's one tortilla that's been folded over. If you were to double the quesadilla, or the tortillas, your nutrition information would change a little bit. So just to be aware of that. I think if you were going to eat the half of that quesadilla, it'd pair really well with fresh fruit or maybe a side salad, or now is the perfect time to grill veggies from your garden or from the store. So those would be some good pairings with this recipe that wouldn't take a lot of additional time either. And then you could also top your quesadilla. Some options we put on there is avocado. It's one of those healthy fats. Non-fat plain Greek yogurt is a great sub for sour cream. And you get less saturated fat, more protein with that. Same kind of creaminess, same type of texture and flavor. Some people like cilantro to add just even more flavoring, green onion, or even some salsa too. So there's a lot of different options to kind of dress up your quesadilla. And as we go on and talk about all these different recipes, we'll probably highlight some of our staple foods, because I think that's a big key in quickness, in preparing meals that are quick, so that you're making your meal with stuff that you have on hand. And to do that, we need to stock our pantries with foods that are nutritious, and then foods that really are versatile and easy to make meals out of. So in this recipe, those staple foods are going to be like our tortillas. Some people, maybe you don't keep tortillas on hand. What we have up here is pizza crust. You can make yourself a margarita pizza with whatever bread you have on hand. But I think having a grain, like a whole grain, whether it be a tortilla, whether it be bread, maybe it's pizza crust, and having that on hand makes this easier. And then another staple would be to have cheese. You can store cheese in your freezer, you can then thaw it out in your fridge. And then another being that olive oil, which just helps cook a lot of different foods, and also some of your canned foods, which could be tomatoes. So thinking about those staples, and we'll kind of elaborate more on that at the end. So now that you're tasting your quesadilla, or it's being passed around, what are our thoughts of our first bites of it? Everyone hasn't had their bite yet, but this side of the room has. Sound good? All right. Question?
How is the avocado fixed?
How is the avocado fixed?
Is it just
the question.
raw, or has it been sauteed or anything?
Oh no, it's just been sliced.
Just raw, okay.
Yep, just raw and sliced. Yep.
Might be a
We
little
even have
melty from being on the quesadilla.
Oh yeah. We even have a sample of the avocados that we use today. I really just wanted to bring this down here to show how drastically different the last time we were here. We had no, it was the time before last, 2 months ago. We had avocados, and they were like this big, right? And these avocados are huge, huge. So it only took like 4 avocados to feed all of you guys.
Any other questions about this recipe or the ingredients used to make it? I'm going to toss the baton over to Lindsay.
Did everybody like their sour cream? Good, because it wasn't sour cream. I was always wanting to trick you guys with that. You got it.
All right. Hear me okay? Also that. Better?
Yep.
Hear me okay? All right. So the next recipe we're going to be talking about is the Mediterranean chickpea quinoa bowl. So how many of you have had like a burrito bowl before? Maybe like Chipotle burrito bowl. So this is kind of the same concept, but it's really versatile. So this one has a Mediterranean spin on it. And I really love these bowls because I can batch cook some grains ahead of time, and that's kind of the base, is having some kind of grain. And so tonight we're featuring quinoa. You could experiment and try different grains like brown rice, farro, millet. There's all kinds of unique grains out there that you could experiment with and batch cook ahead of time, and that's kind of your base of your bowl. And then you layer in different textures. The protein that we're featuring in this bowl is chickpeas, which is a really inexpensive, great staple to have on hand for protein. I think we picked out we have some black beans here that we picked out. And what I look for when I'm picking out canned beans to help with reducing the sodium intake is looking for the no salt added variety. So have any of you seen the no salt added options? And we find that a lot of times the cost is about the same, if not the exact same, as the variety that comes with all the sodium in it. So the sodium in here, and similar to the canned chickpeas with no salt added, is 10 milligrams for half a cup. so that's really low. Whereas the regular version has around 370 milligrams for half a cup. So pretty big difference there. Really great way to cut down on the sodium. If that's not an option for you, you can always just rinse them really well. That will help remove a little bit of the extra sodium off there. And another thing too is when you batch cook your grain, like when I do my quinoa for something like this, I like to cook it in a broth to give it some more flavor. Unless maybe you were going to use the grain in like a breakfast dish, like more of a sweet kind of dish, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. Maybe you leave it just in water. But if you plan to use it for savory dishes, cooking it in some broth really helps to give it a little bit of flavor. And again, for watching our sodium, looking for the unsalted options will save you quite a bit. Any other tips on the batch cooking the grains?
Whenever it comes to any type of canned beans, if you're going to use them in a cold salad or anything like what we're using it for today, you'll always want to rinse those beans, all right? And that's just going to help them not clump together so much. A lot of the starches and stuff that cook off of the beans end up in the bottom of the can, and a lot of that comes out with the beans. So you'll always want to colander those up, rinse them off really well. If it's chickpeas, you can usually use your spray head on your sink to rinse them. If it's something like, sometimes black beans, depending on the brand, can be a little bit more delicate. Great Northern Briar or white beans, those you'll definitely want to use like a cup of water to rinse. Toss them around in some water and drain it off. You won't want to spray them with any type of force because it will break them to pieces. So if it's not a very strong bean, then you'll just want to soak them, rinse them, drain them, and they should be good to go. And like she said, that'll help get rid of some of that added sodium as well, unless you're cooking them yourself and you don't add any salt.
Yep, great tips. And so the base of a bowl is generally some kind of grain, and then we have some kind of protein. So that could be some chicken, some kind of meat. Beans again are a great, cheap, affordable, quick, easy staple to have on hand that you don't have to cook. You just rinse them and eat them. And then we usually have some kind of veggie in there. So you could have salad greens, you could have vegetables that you've roasted ahead of time, and you could have, in this case, we're going to be using a little bit of chopped red onion and some cucumber, some fresh parsley. So it's kind of just tailored to your taste and preferences. This would probably go well with some red bell pepper in there as well, maybe even some tomato. And then the third component, we have our grain, our protein, our veggies, and then our third component would be some kind of sauce or flavoring, right? That's going to make it nice and tasty. So having some staples on hand to make sauces with, or even purchasing some sauces to have. So this sauce here, we've got roasted red peppers, slivered almonds, a little bit of olive oil, some garlic, paprika, cumin, and crushed red pepper is optional. If you don't like spicy, you might leave that out. And that goes into a little mini processor or food chopper. Does anyone have one of those at home? Like a little mini. I brought a picture of the one that I have. I didn't bring it with me, but I brought a picture of what it looks like. And this is the Ninja brand. They have several different brands. This is only like $17 or so at Walmart, and it has been one of the best kitchen tools that I've bought because it saves a lot of time. If you're wanting to chop things really fast, you can throw in an onion in there and you just pulse it a couple of times and your onion's chopped up. They have some too that are even cheaper that are not electrical. You just have to use your hand. I don't know if you remember the infomercials for Slap Chop back in the day. Yeah, it's kind of similar to that. So you can make whip up sauces really fast in here, salsas. So it's a great, fast, quick kitchen tool. Yeah. Anything else to add there?
Oh, when doing quinoa, one of the best ways that I've found to cook quinoa is to get your, like if it's a lunch or dinner dish, if it's going into a casserole, like Lindsay had alluded to, always use some type of broth to season it. There's nothing wrong with cooking it with just water, but it's kind of like a pet peeve of mine. You never cook chicken without putting seasoning on it. No protein gets cooked in my house or in my kitchen without seasoning on it. It's just not a good idea. You always season it. And so doing the broth with the quinoa is just that same type of crazy thing that I just have to do, right? It just makes it taste better. It really does. But whenever you cook it, get your broth at a hard rolling boil. Measure out your amount of quinoa that's going in it. Throw it in there. Let it simmer and boil, because it'll taper off the boiling for a couple seconds, and it'll pick right back up. Let it boil at a hard boil for about 30 seconds, and then shut it off. Leave it on the warmer, put the lid on it, and let it set. Usually in about 25 to 30 minutes, it'll all be done. It doesn't take the quinoa that long for it to start absorbing water. Sometimes they have to, certain types of beans and stuff like that, they have to boil for a while before they'll start absorbing water. Quinoa is not one of those grains. Rice usually takes a while because it's a very hard grain. It doesn't take that long for the quinoa. So get it at boil, put the lid on it, shut it down, let it set. Yes?
Do you stir it when you first dump it in, or you don't need to?
I would stir it to keep it from clumping. I haven't had any issues with it clumping before. Usually, because if you've got it at a rolling boil, you're pouring it in there fairly slow anyway, and it keeps it from clumping up. Some things like oatmeal and malt meal and stuff like that, your breakfast cereals have a really bad time. If you don't stir them, they'll clump up really bad. But yeah, give it a couple whisks, make sure there's no clumps in there at the bottom, and it should be good to go.
Yeah, so this is what it looks like for those of you that haven't seen the quinoa. It's like they call it a pseudo cereal. It's kind of a cross between a grain and a seed, actually, or a cereal. And it's a grain that's higher in protein than others. So another way that the protein is boosted in this entree without using meat is from the grain itself, actually. And you want to watch too if you buy quinoa. Some of them are rinsed, so that means that you can just cook it right away, and some require for you to rinse it first or wash it. Has anyone had it without it being rinsed, or maybe thought it tasted really bitter? Yes. I think the first time I went to cook quinoa, I didn't realize that, and I was like, oh my gosh, how are people liking this stuff? It tasted so bitter, and it's because the quinoa actually has what's called saponin, which is like a protectant coating on the outside of it to protect it from pests and birds, and if you don't rinse it off, it can taste pretty bitter. So some you pay a little bit more for, and it'll say like pre-washed or rinsed, but others you may pay a little bit less, and you've got to rinse it yourself.
And I will warn you, if you haven't ever done it before, it's kind of a process, and it's kind of risky too, because you never know if you get all that stuff off of it. And so if it was me, I would just look for the pre-rinse so that you don't have to worry about it. It's really not that big of a cost comparison between the two either.
Yep. Let's see, what else we're going to add. I think that was, I also was going to point out too, like by batch cooking the grain ahead of time, the quinoa does cook pretty fast. It's about 15 minutes to cook the amount that you need for this recipe. But you could also get instant, brown rice is another grain that would probably lend well for this dish. So finding ways to save yourself time during the week makes it faster, right? So whether you batch cook this on a Sunday night before your week started, or you buy a grain that cooks, really fast, like an instant brown rice, can save a lot of time.
How long does quinoa keep the batch cooking?
I generally keep mine for about 3 to 5 days in the fridge, and I've froze it before. Like if I made too much and realized I'm not going to get to eat it all, I just put it, try to get all the air out and throw it in the freezer, and then I'll throw it in like a soup or a stew or a casserole down the road. What do we think? Do we guys try it? Yeah. I think the sauce, I love having a jar of roasted red peppers on hand. That's kind of a staple in my house to throw together and things like this. And then the feta cheese, I love feta cheese. That's a big staple in my house. Oh, we forgot the feta. Oh, darn it. Well, imagine it was feta, and I have to go home and try it with some feta cheese. It's good. Okay. Well, any questions?
Have you tried any quinoa?
Hmm?
Have you tried any quinoa? K-E-N-A-U-A. It's very similar to quinoa,
Uh-huh.
but it's red and it's tinier.
Huh, I haven't tried that.
Bring you by some.
Yeah. She was asking about it. You said it was called quinoa.
Quinoa, I think that's how you say it.
Quinoa? Huh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's all kinds of unique grains. If you go to the health food market sometimes, some section in Walmart or Hy-Vee, some of the stores in
Nuts.com.
or yeah.
That'll do it.
Online. There's lots of different, yeah. All right. I guess we're gonna hand it over to Rhonda.
So, how did you like that first one, the quesadilla? It hit the spot, because I was needing a little snack, so I thought that was really good. And that'd be really quick to make. And I agree with just keeping, I just keep those whole wheat tortillas at home all the time, so I can throw something in them. Haven't done this yet, but I will. So our next recipe is the quick and easy chicken stir fry. How many stir fry cookers do I have out there? Yeah. It's quick. You just throw it in, I just throw it in my wok and we're done, kind of thing. So this particular recipe, we did start out with using some of the instant brown rice because we're thinking about fast. And so occasionally, I think it's okay to use something like this and you get it prepared lots more quickly. Or you could do, as Lindsay suggested, do some batch cooking and maybe use it, if you use the longer cooking, maybe you could use it later in the week if you wanted to. Or you could also do the instant brown rice. So this is taking chicken. You could use a different protein or a different meat if you wanted. And then just, putting that in a skillet, cast iron. Tell us about cast iron skillet. You like using cast iron skillet?
I'm not a big fan of cast iron skillets. And a lot of it just has to do with the fact that, I work in a kitchen where anybody and everybody uses everything. And if cast iron is not treated appropriately, it doesn't work out. And so we've had some cast iron skillets and stuff in our kitchen here. And I've tried steering away from them. I stick to the surgical stainless steel pans. And plus, all of our induction ranges don't operate well with cast iron either. So they work off of a coil magnet. And that's how those induction ranges work. And so they don't bode very well with cast iron. Now, if I'm out camping, that's usually all that I use is cast iron. But it's my stuff and nobody else gets to touch it. So, because I'm telling you, all it takes is one person not going through the process appropriately with storing, cleaning with cast iron, and you've got to go through the whole sequence of reseasoning it all over again. And it's much harder if people mistreat it because you have no idea what they put in it, how they treated it, and so it seems to always find one or two other hiccups on getting it seasoned again.
So we may not use cast iron. Another kind of skillet would work just fine. I use at home. I use my electric wok a lot of time when I do stir fry like this. But chopping the chicken up into little cubes or little smaller pieces, and then that of course makes it quick to cook. So that's just doing it in a skillet, just cooking about 4 or 5 minutes. And of course we would encourage you could use olive oil or you could use canola oil or sesame oil. All of those would be appropriate. They have that higher smoke point that they would be appropriate to use. So then you would remove your chicken and then put your vegetables in. So you're going to have those vegetables that are listed. They're already all chopped up because you had all day Saturday and Sunday to get those ready, right? So one of our door prizes today is something for you to put all of those things in. So I think some of the quickness or doing things fast in the evenings maybe, or at lunch even, is having things ready, get in there and knowing you're going to use it sometime through the week. So chopping those things up and storing them and having available. So this particular recipe uses mushrooms, broccoli, carrots, red bell pepper, onion, green onions if you have them. So those kinds of things could be all chopped up and ready for you to go to put into your stir fry.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of that stuff, if you're a gardener, those can come straight out of your garden, rinsed up and ready to go. But the biggest thing is understanding when to put them in the wok or in your cast iron skillet, the vegetables. The harder the vegetable, the longer it's going to take to cook, right? So you definitely want to put these vegetables in to cook in stages. You'll do your peppers, your carrots, then your onions, peppers, broccoli usually will go last. But in this case, you've got mushrooms as well. So the mushrooms will go after the broccoli. And in that process of getting them in the wok or getting them in the skillet to cook them, you always want to make sure that you're trying to stagger them in such a way that they all come done and ready to eat at the same time. So that way you don't have, carrots that are scorched and, shriveled up, or broccoli that's undercooked, or broccoli that was put in at the same time as your onions and peppers and carrots, and now it's mush. So mushrooms the same way. If you overcook mushrooms, you'll know it because they will just absolutely turn to nothing. They'll be hard to find in there at times, depending on how thick you cut them. And that has a lot to do with something like this as well, with a stir fry, is the way that you cut it. Personally, I wouldn't chop or dice onions in a stir fry. I would leave them in slices, slice them julienne, about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then that way, they're more prevalent with the rest of the vegetables. By dicing them, they have a tendency to kind of get lost. Because in a sauce like this as well, it's a very flavorful sauce. It can be really easy to lose the onions in that stir fry. So like I said, personally, that's how I would always do a stir fry, is to slice all the vegetables. When dealing with ginger, does anybody ever use fresh ginger? Good, lots of you, good. It freezes really well too, right? The way I've always done it is peel the outside of it with a vegetable peeler. If you use paring knife for that, I know some people only use paring knives for that type of thing. That's your prerogative. But then whenever you go for a sauce, you'll want to use something. I know it says dice it. Sometimes dicing it can be a little bit tricky because you're not going to get as much of the flavor out of it as you would if you either put it into a food processor or if you've got one of these guys here. You can just go to town on it, get out however much you need, wrap it up in cellophane, put it in your freezer until the next time you need it. It really does freeze really well. It'll get a little bit dark in color whenever you get it out of the freezer. It'll be a darker yellow. But as long as it doesn't get a lot of air contact after it's put in the freezer, it won't brown hardly at all. So, as long as you're not using it for pickling and putting it on sushi or something, you really won't ever notice whether it's been frozen or made fresh. And it adds such an amazing flavor profile. I don't think people that use powdered ginger at home, you really get shorted on the flavors that are in a fresh ginger. It's such a citrus flavor, and I think you miss that in the dehydrated, processed ginger that we buy a lot of times in the store.
So having your vegetables all ready, so you can just throw those in there after you take your chicken out. And then the sauce, jumped over to the ginger in the sauce.
Yes.
That really makes it good.
Yes.
And so you'll notice that the recipe does call for using low sodium or no salt added chicken broth. So again, the sodium content of this particular recipe is reduced because of using unsalted broth and then low sodium soy sauce. So that's always what the staple at my house is. I just don't ever buy the full-fledged chicken broth or the soy sauce. I just can't handle that much salt anymore, I don't think so. So that really does help with reducing our overall sodium content of this recipe. So you also do add a little bit of brown sugar, and you also do some cornstarch with your water to thicken it a little bit. So the idea would be to do your chicken, set it aside, do your vegetables in your skillet, minimal amount of oil that you use with this, and then add your chicken back in so that they're combined, and then serve it with your rice and with the sauce then over it. So you've tasted it now. Is that the way we did it? What are you talking about? So how does it taste? Is it good? Stir fries are always good. There's something that I think you can do very quickly, and they can also be very nutritious. We've got all those vegetables in there. We do have a little bit of rice. We've got our protein in our chicken, and then our sauce is a lower sodium than it would be that if you picked up already prepared sauce, at the grocery store off the shelf.
You can also freeze that sauce as well. Put it in a Ziploc bag, get all the air out of it, put it in the freezer. It won't freeze solid because of some of the oil and the sugar content that's in it, but it'll pretty well freeze frozen. At least you'll be able to scoop out just a little bit as you need it. Throw it in the skillet once you're ready to go, and it's right there and ready for you.
Okay, so you could do this one, I think, in our 15-minute requirement or less, because especially if you had your vegetables all chopped and sitting and waiting for you maybe in the fridge. The one that you will do at home, maybe yes, already doing it at home. Maybe just do it faster, I guess, to fit into fast foods. So Jackie and Lindsay are going to finish up with some how to select some things that would be fast foods for your pantry.
So we kind of put together a how-to build your pantry handout. It's a separate handout of your recipes, so we're going to kind of talk about that and just what that is and what that looks like. So essentially in our pantry, we want basic items that are really versatile, inexpensive, and have a longer shelf life. So we've kind of given you a guide to maybe help you explore what your pantry might or could look like. And so just some basics of that, having these on hand can prevent you from resorting to going out to a fast food restaurant or ordering takeout or delivery, which are often foods that are loaded with excess calories, sodium, and saturated fat, which are nutrients that we do want to control and monitor. So having these staples on hand can really set you off on a good foot. And so one thing to note that's kind of talked about in society is processed foods. And what are processed foods? So everything that's on the table right now, the foods that you've had, are some of our processed foods. So on here, it does give you that definition of processed foods, in that not all are created equally, essentially. So processed foods are just a term to describe how a food has been packaged and then undergone a method of preservation to allow a longer shelf life. So your processed foods could be anything from like white bread to cookies to milk and protein foods like tuna. And so there are some better choices we can make when it comes to selecting processed foods, but not all processed foods are bad. There's more truth to it, okay? So we're kind of, Lindsay and I did a tour day Walmart and found some of these staple foods, and we'll kind of talk through them a little bit.
Yeah, I think what I look for when I'm shopping is things that generally I try to find shorter ingredients list, ingredients that I can identify, that I know what they are. I'm always skeptical because unfortunately, food companies want your dollar, right? And so they'll put flashy terms like natural and organic and all these flashy terms, marketing terms. Yeah, non-GMO, all these terms that doesn't always mean that it's actually a truly maybe healthy product, right? So digging deeper and always being your own, detective and looking further, looking at that label, looking at the ingredients list. I've picked up a lot of products that are marketed as heart healthy, and they have trans fat in it, which is that hydrogenated oil. And if we eat a lot of that over time, that raises our bad cholesterol, lowers our good cholesterol. So that's something you kind of want to watch out for, some of those marketing terms. The other thing is I'm always checking the serving size, right? Because all of the numbers are based on that serving size. So like for something like the beans, the serving size is half a cup, and on the regular ones, half a cup had 372 milligrams in it. So if we ate the whole can, there's 3.5 servings in the container. You can do the math. We could easily take in, over 1,000 milligrams of sodium, whereas if we, picked a lower sodium option, we'd save quite a bit. And then the other thing too, we had fun in the frozen section. We had a lot of fun looking at all the different frozen entrees. And so sometimes it may mean that, saving time means that we might rely on some of these frozen options. I know some people like the lean cuisines or healthy choice meals. And so we really dug into looking at the cost, the serving size. That's another thing to watch out for. For example, this one here, you may assume that it's just like one serving, but there's about 2 servings in here. And for someone, it depends on how active you are. Your calorie need is another thing to consider. Maybe if you did eat the whole container, that's not a big deal for you. Maybe you need that much calories, you need that much energy. So kind of keep that in mind. With the frozen entrees too, we noticed that some of them are really low calorie, almost to what I consider a snack for most adults. 180 calories is kind of more in like the snack range, and what may happen is you may eat that but end up feeling hungry an hour later, right? So we want to kind of think about calories, the quality of our calories. Where are they coming from? How are they going to help us to have that energy that we need? So thinking about that as like our Mediterranean, the chickpea bowl, it's got 479 calories in it. But we're getting a 1.5 cup serving. So that's pretty, if you imagine a cup and a half, it's a pretty generous portion. We're getting 8 grams of fiber, which, does anyone know how many grams we want a day? 25 grams. So we're like half of our fiber need right there. And there's 25 grams of fat, but most of it is from unsaturated fat. So it's coming from the olive oil, from the olives. So the majority of that fat in this recipe is actually from the healthy quality fat. So that's kind of important to think about when we're picking out things that are maybe like ready-made, or when we're thinking about in terms of calories of our meal, what are the calories composed of? So this I want to point out, this guy here, there's 13 grams of fiber in 1.5 cup serving of this. So this is a good one we found that we liked. The cost, we liked that it was lower in sodium. It's got 500 milligrams per serving. So it's a little bit higher, but we could still budget that in if we were trying to, think about what else are we eating the rest of the day.
So this was $2.47 at Walmart. In comparison to like a Hungry Man or maybe like a lean cuisine, very comparable. And if there was that cost difference, it's about 20 to 90 cents difference. So sometimes you do pay a little bit more, but it really pays off because you get more nutrients that your body utilizes.
What is that? I can't read it.
This is the Bird's Eye. It's the Bird's Eye Tuscan blend.
So they had a few different varieties of flavors. Can't name them all right now, but they did have some different options, and all were very comparable in their nutrient profile. So some other things that we have up here on the table, I think it's always good to have grains. Grains are kind of, it's your body's main source of fuel, your main source of energy, and so making sure that our meals do have some sort of a source We recommend those whole grains. So up here you'll see those whole grains of that brown rice, the instant brown rice, which doesn't take very long to prepare. Quinoa, as Lindsay had showed you this package, and then also we have these pizza crusts, which are just great to kind of throw on some of those veggie toppings, those sauces, those olive oils. So grains are great to have. They're relatively very shelf stable. It takes a while for them to go bad. So these should be on your pantry list. Then we also have that we didn't have up here on our table today because produce, but cheese and milk is another good one to have on hand as we're always kind of adding those in the recipes. Our canned foods we covered pretty good. Up here we do have canned tuna. This is a canned tuna that's packed in water. This is considered heart healthy. It's got that heart healthy stamp on there. So if any of you who are eating for heart health or this pretty poor quality image, but they do have that certification right there, which helps you identify those foods that are lower in sodium, contain those healthy fats, and even fiber when it's appropriate. Obviously, our protein doesn't have fiber, but any questions about the foods we have up here, or just foods that would be appropriate for building a pantry? Okay, so our lucky winner today is going to get to take home their pantry, our pantry up here, and kind of get started on building theirs. So we'll hand out prizes, and then we'll cover our next month's information.
So one thing that you might want to keep in mind is that you can also go on and watch a YouTube video of what we did tonight. We have a really neat guy that puts it all together and makes us look really good. So if you would like to watch that, you could. It will be this one in a few days, and the past ones are also available as well. The recipes are also on Pinterest. If you want to see the recipes that way, you lose it or something like that. So that's available. And then registration for the next class will open tonight at 8 p.m. The August 13th class is going to be on a gut feeling, pre and probiotics. So that should be something that probably everybody has an interest